as files. Now these files will contain PDF copies of the slide decks for note-taking purposes, as well as any links to resources we explore throughout the course, along with other information I thought would be helpful. The courses in this certification path are designed with the AZ-104 Admin Associate in mind, making sure we address the skills measured for the exam. I have included the links to the topics we cover, which will provide additional depth. You'll also find code snippets demonstrated in this course. It's all going to be in there. So let's see how we can... leverage role-based access control, or Rbac, to secure our environment. Restricting access based on the need to know and least privileged security principles is how we approach security as an administrator. In Azure, we can leverage role-based access control to help in this approach. You can use role-based access control to assign permissions to users, groups, and applications at a certain scope. The scope of a role assignment can be a subscription. That assignment would be inherited to all child resources, and then a resource group. As with a subscription, this is similar, but really reduces the access by assigning the permission at the resource group level. And then finally, we get down to the granular with a single resource. You can use the built-in roles in Azure to assign privileges to users, or as we will see, you can create a custom role. That role is based off an existing role. Now, access management for Azure resources is critical. Role-based access control helps manage who has access, what they can do, and where they have access. So for instance, we could allow one user to manage virtual machines in a subscription and another user to manage virtual networks. We can also have a DBA group to manage SQL databases in a subscription, or simply allow an application to access all resources in a resource group. In order to effectively understand Rbac, we need to know the players. First, we'll start out with the security principles. If you're already a Windows Server admin, a few of these should be familiar. First, we have the user. It's an individual who has a profile in the Azure Active Directory. You can also assign roles to users in other tenants, which is important to understand for the exam. Then we have groups. Now, a group is a set of users created in Azure Active Directory. When you assign a role to the group, all users in that group will have that role, much like we do on our on-prem management. And then we have a service principal. This is a security identity used by applications or services to access specific Azure resources. Now, you can think of it as a username and password for that application. And then we have a managed identity. So this is an identity in Azure Active Directory that is automatically managed by Azure. You typically use the managed identities when developing cloud applications, like managing the credentials for authenticating to Azure services. So Azure Key Vault would be an example, rather than storing the credentials in the code. Same with virtual machines. You'll see the identity option under virtual machines. Each resource can have only one system-assigned identity. Now, as I said, Azure includes built-in roles based on the services. They also have broad-based roles, as we will see here. The first three apply to all resource types. So the first is owner. So the owner has full access to resources, including the right to delegate access to others. As a Windows admin, this sounds a lot like the file permission of full control, with the ability to grant access. Now, if we drill down a little bit more, there's a built-in role called network owner. Now, the network owner can grant network contributor to another user or group. The contributor can create and manage all types of Azure resources, but can't grant access to others. Now, be mindful with these roles as they only apply to the resource itself, not what the resource may contain. So for instance, a storage account contributor can manage storage accounts, but does not have access to the data within. Again, they can manage the account, but they do not have access to the data. That's an important concept for the exam. And then we have reader. Now, reader, just like in file permissions, they can view existing Azure resources. So we might have a backup reader, which can only view the backup jobs and settings, but cannot make any changes. Also note, if you have the reader role assigned to a virtual machine, you're not going to be able to start or stop that virtual machine, only see the settings. So for the exam, understand that you will have an owner, contributor, and reader. For example, there will be a storage blob owner, storage blob contributor, and storage blob reader. So you'll see services with all those different roles. And then we have user access administrator. And what this does for you is it lets you manage user access to Azure resources. Now, along with allowing access, Azure has a feature to explicitly deny access called deny assignments. This is very similar to the Windows deny file permission. So this blocks users from performing specific actions, even if a role assignment allows it. So like I said, very similar to the file permissions in Windows. Denying a permission trumps any allow permission. Same here. It's created and managed in Azure to protect resources. Now, it can only be created using Azure blueprints or managed apps. You cannot explicitly create your own deny assignments. The final piece to understand with role-based access control is scope. When you grant access at a parent scope, those permissions are then inherited to the child scopes. For example, if you assign the owner role to a user at the management group scope, that user can manage everything in all subscriptions in the management group. Then, if you assign the reader role to a group at the subscription scope, the members of that group can view every resource group and resource in the subscription. Moving forward, if you assign the contributor role to an application at the resource group scope, it can manage resources of all types in that resource group, but not other resource groups in the subscription. And then finally, and less practical for users and groups, we can assign access to each individual resource. So the big takeaway here is to be prepared to be given a scenario and whether or not that user or group will have the ability to do X based on the roles they have been assigned. Make sure you pay attention to the scope as well. Be sure to think of the least privileged security principle. Now, resources, as I mentioned earlier, will have their own owner, contributor, and reader roles. For example, if you're asked to grant a user at the resource group level the ability to manage a virtual network and make setting changes, etc., what role would you assign? Well, we wouldn't go with just the owner because that's too broad. What about contributor? Well, we're getting close, but we'll dial it in even more. We'd assign that user the network contributor role. I don't expect they're going to stray beyond the main objectives in the 104 exam as to the different resource roles: storage, network, virtual machine, and monitor. So let's walk through the process of managing access using role-based access control. Let's start at the uppermost level, our management group. To manage access at this level, we need to click Access Control. You will find this menu option on all the resources, so get familiar with it. Once you click it, it will reveal the Access Control blade. Now we can see here at the top where we have several tabs. We'll be most concerned with check access, role assignments, roles, and deny assignments. So here in the check access tab, we can view our logged on users' access under my access on the left, and then jump right into the role assignments. And then who else has access under the view access to this resource, and also view deny assignments. Now going back to our management group, any assignments that we assign at this level will be inherited by all resources, including sub-management groups, subscriptions, and resources within the subscription. Now let's jump to the resource group level, shrinking the scope of our access and flexing our least privileged mindset. So to add access, we can either choose from the middle panel or up here at the add option, commonly found in most resource blades. Notice we can also assign co-administrator as well as a custom role. Once we select add, we're presented with a side blade where we can assign the role to either a user, group, or a service principal. We can search or select the user from the list, and here I've chosen to grant Janice Thomas the reader access role to this resource group, meaning she will be able to see all of the resources contained in this resource group, their settings and all, but will not have the ability to create or modify any resources. We can verify her access from the previous page displaying the following. This is where we can see who is assigned what. Here, I filtered on the reader role, and we can see Janice has reader access to this resource. Pretty slick. Now, what if she needed to manage the virtual machines in this resource group? So what would we do then? Well, would I add contributor here? No, still too broad. You guessed it, we would grant her the virtual machine contributor role. Now let's see other ways we can view the assignments and roles. So here we're going to add a role assignment using PowerShell. We have the new AZ role assignment. Then we use the sign-in name, which is Janice Thomas, and then the role definition, which we have virtual machine contributor, and then the resource group name. And then we can verify it with the get AZ role assignment. Now we're stepping into the interpret access assignments skill measure. In this screenshot, we see right here, Janice Thomas was in fact assigned the reader role. In this screenshot, we're leveraging Azure CLI to verify our role assignment. And as we can see here, Janice is all good to go. So here are the role assignment commands for both PowerShell and Azure CLI. I also included the get AZ deny assignment PowerShell command. So what if the roles don't fit what you need? Well, we can create a custom role. So to create a custom role, we have a few options. We can clone an existing role in the portal, or we can create from an ARM template. And then finally, we can use PowerShell, which is what I'm going to focus on here. Essentially, you're going to modify an existing role definition and then create a new role using the modified definition. Let's take a look at some of the requirements. What we're seeing here is the table of the required properties. The main thing we'll be concerned with is the name, actions, and assignable scopes. Now for name, this is the display name of the custom role. The display name must be unique at the scope of the Azure Active Directory. And then with actions, that's a property which is an array of strings that specifies the management operations that the role allows to be performed. The bracket signifies the array, which means it can contain multiple action assignments. We'll take a peek at the actions in the next slide. The action is what we have the ability to do with each Microsoft provider. Similarly to actions, in that it's a string array, this role can be assigned across multiple scopes upon creation. So here we see the role action examples with the operation string and the resulting action. Now the wildcard is just that. It's a wildcard signifying all resources in that provider. We go from the broad-based non-least privilege principle to dialing it down to a single action on a single resource, as well as a combination of any. So we can get pretty creative with our custom roles. Okay, so at the command line, I'm using the get AZ role definition for the virtual machine contributor and just displaying the actions. And this isn't all of them. There's a lot going on here. This is the definition we're going to grab and modify. So here's the complete code for creating a custom role. This is the sort of code block you might see on the exam. They'll test your knowledge of basic PowerShell commands related to the role assignments. Here, the PowerShell command is grabbing the role definition, similar to the screenshot on the previous slide. So it's get AZ role definition. Then we assign the new name and description. Then we move to the action block, where we're clearing that truckload of actions and then adding our own actions. Notice we have read access to storage, network, and compute, all resources needed for a virtual machine. The last step to building our role is to add an assignable scope after we have cleared the previous. Then our last step is to create the new definition based on what we've added to our role variable. This role will now be viewable in the portal. Again, be familiar with the two PowerShell commandlets used here, get AZ role definition and new AZ role definition. Also get comfortable with the action syntax for each provider as we discussed earlier in the table. Here we can verify our brand new boring role definition exists, and we can also confirm it in the portal. Note the icon is different than the built-in roles, and it is also labeled a custom role. So let's jump into the portal and see how we can manage our role-based access control. I like to start my demos off in the Microsoft Docs site. We're at the Azure role-based access control documentation. Now there's a lot of good information here, so if you want to get more granular than what we've covered in this course, I think we've covered pretty much what you need to know for the exam, but if you want to do a deeper dive, this is a great place to start. They have great tutorials and different how-tos. And then I also wanted to show you or you could find the listing of the Azure built-in roles. I linked this in the exercise files tabs, so you can come here and you can scroll down and check all the different roles, including the resource roles. So let's go to the portal. And what I want to do now is I'm going to start out, I'm going to look at management group. So right here I got manage, we'll grab management groups. I'll go right to my demo management. Now I could go to the tenant group as well and look at access control, but I'm going to go into my demo management group and then look at access control here. Now I can verify my access by clicking view my access. As the owner of this subscription, I am the owner. So I have owner and user access administrator. So we'll close out of that. So then here we have our role assignments, which is currently assigned, and then roles. These are the existing roles at this level. So we have, I believe, up to 222 roles that we can choose from. Then any deny assignments. Now again, deny assignments are only created using Azure Blueprints. So let's drill down a little bit more and go to the resource group level. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose my resource group here, PS course. I have several resources in here, virtual network, I have a virtual machine, a bastion host. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to access control, and then I'll view my access here, which I already know what I have as the owner. So let's close this out, and let's see if we can find what Janice Thomas has. Here she is. And she has reader as well as VM reader. Now, what problem do you see here? We have redundant roles, really. The reader role, in my opinion, is too broad for this. So we created that custom role in the discussion. For what reason? We wanted her to only be able to look at virtual machines. In this instance, in this case, what we have to do is we have to think of least privileged security. So what I want to do is I want to remove that role, that reader role, which is too broad. So we'll close out of this. We'll jump into role assignments. And then we'll scroll down and we'll find Janice. And here she is right here with the reader role. As I said, she does have VM reader role. This is more granular. This is only to look at virtual machines, whereas this reader role lets her see everything in the resource group, and maybe we don't want that. Now, I do have her logged in. So if I go to her account, we'll go to resource groups, and she has access to these two resource groups. So we have a container, we have bastion information. So what I want to do is I want to kind of whittle that down a little bit. So let's go back to my login. And so right here at Janice Thomas, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this role, and then I'm simply going to remove it. Now we'll jump back into her login. So we'll do a refresh here. The portal didn't refresh what was in the resource group, but notice here I clicked on the container and it says under the details, and we'll scroll this up a little bit, you don't have authorization to access this resource. So we'll go back to the resource group and let's see if we can jump into our Windows 1 VM. Sure enough, we have access, because remember, in that custom role, we granted her the read access. Now I'm going to show you one thing with that read access. That only gives us the ability to actually view the information. So if I wanted to start this resource, I have that same error. I don't have access to start or stop any virtual machines, only view their information. I could go more granularly in that custom role and add the compute, stop, and start actions. So let's jump back, and I'm going to go and look at our roles right now. And we see our custom role that I discussed in the discussion, the VM reader. Note it has that different icon. The type is listed as and the screen here, you have monitoring contributor. So there's different resource roles that will be thrown at you in the exam. And understand, always think of the principle of least privilege, as we did just here, restricting Janice's access to just virtual machines. We'll see you in the review. So let's review some of what we covered in this course. These are the items I want you to make sure you go back and check out for the exam prep. Now, as I said, the exam is going to come at you with scenarios, oftentimes using the same scenario with different nuances and distractors. It'll be up to you to see through that and pick out the critical information. Remember, the least privileged principle. So we learned that roles can be assigned to users, groups, as well as applications. And then we dove into security principles. We saw the familiar ones, which are users and groups. And then we also have the service principle and a managed identity. Now, the managed identity is typically used, for example, in cloud apps, where you can leverage Key Vault versus having the creds in the code. And then we learned that custom roles can be assigned across different tenants. Moving on, we looked at the core roles, which include owner, contributor, reader, as well as user access administrator. There you'll see other resource roles, such as storage account owner or network contributor. In the exam, as I said, always think of the equivalent resource role, keeping the least privileged security principle in mind. Then we talked about the deny assignment, which overrules any explicitly assigned role, and it's created using Azure blueprints. We discovered how to interpret or view effective role assignments using PowerShell with the get AZ role assignment. And then we wrapped up with custom roles, where we essentially modify an existing role. We used PowerShell to do this with these commands to remember: get AZ role definition and new AZ role definition. If you need further learning resources or information about the topics covered in this module, check out the documentation at docs.microsoft.com, along with the links in the exercise files related to this course. This is a great resource for Azure administrators and will allow you to go deeper on any of the topics related to the 104 exam. And don't forget the PowerPoints for a quick study guide. And if you have any questions about the course, please join the discussion on the discussion board for the course at pluralsight.com, as well as on social media. Now, this puts a wrap on this course, Microsoft Azure Administrator, Managed Role-Based Access Control, hopefully getting you a step closer to passing the AZ 104 exam. I hope you enjoyed this course as I have putting it together. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here at Pluralsight.